Hey everybody. So recently there's been a poll released by Morning Consult stating that 2/3 of Americans support a solar mandate for new homes. So I have a problem, a fundamental problem with polls like this and, statements where an argument is made not on the merits of the question or the ethical or the just ramifications of a question or policy. It's all just do most people agree? This whole democracy angle of things. And as long as enough people agree, we can force everybody to do the same thing, or we can force everybody to do what we want. And so that's the problem with a question like this. And I don't like it. And fundamentally, it's a crowbar to kind of push people into an authoritarian way of thinking. Because even if on a certain issue, let's say the solar panel thing, most people agree. Well, if most people agree, then why do we need the government to force it to happen? If 2/3 of Americans really believed it, like in their heart and soul, they're like, solar is the way to go. It's going to save money. It's going to save the planet. It's going to bring us closer to a peaceful utopia amongst all human beings. Well, I don't think we'd have to mandate people to do it. Especially if when push comes to shove and they're engaging in this action that they believe is moral and everybody should take part in, well, then they get to bear the cost of the monetary cost of a policy like this. And if it's and then they can take their moral theorizing and have a real world exercise. Do they believe it's strong enough to pay for it? And that's, I think, where we need to realize that policies and our desires and the things that we would impose onto the rest of society cost money. And, if everybody thinks that it's great, well then let's make it happen. But then if the cost is too high, well then maybe that's something that we shouldn't do. Because we live in a environment of scarcity, right? There's only so much money, there's only so much materials, there's only so much time, there's only so much labor that we can pump into projects that we want. And just mandating things, on one end, it hides the costs. It prevents some people from engaging in activities they want to do, like this solar panel mandate thing. That's gonna elevate the cost of housing, which is gonna hurt the poor. So there's all sorts of problems that and complications that happen in real life that questions like this and pleas to the will of the people completely miss, because you're measuring a utopian vision for the future versus what we can actually do, what the average person can actually afford. And the utopian vision a lot of times wins out. And that's how we have this creeping invasion of like all of our lives, and where we imagine that we can just vote for something and force other people to live how we want to. So questions like this, I think, kind of help people miss the real world implications of their actions. And actually, the way that this question was phrased, it tries to present, the real world ramifications of a policy like this. But it's a question that's several sentences long, and it tries to packs in like 2 data points, and then we can imagine that, like, oh yeah, well, that's the only ramifications, that's the only consequences that would happen for policy like this. And that bleeds into every question that or every policy that people try to push and say like, oh, most people support this or most people support that. I don't know. Most people are average. Most people are capable of taking care of their own lives and not necessarily managing the entirety of society. And so I think it's kind of silly in that angle to imagine that we can, just crowdsource this highly, crowdsource what we should do in this highly specialized area with people who have no idea how it works, and they have no expertise, and all they can do is rely on the expertise of others. But everybody's got their own angle. Everybody's got their own, policy preferences, and nobody's completely unbiased. And so when we do these kinds of, hey, what do you think? Or let's just crowdsource this. It's kind of whoever can pump out the best propaganda wins. And I don't think that's how we should. I don't think it's how we should organize society and decide on policy. I had one other point. Oh yes. In a larger picture, it's pretty scary to see how there's been an escalation in the acceptance and in practice of the government compelling people to purchase goods and services that they would not normally have. And I think one of the pivotal ones recently was the Affordable Health Care Act, where people are compelled to purchase health insurance. And whether you believe it's a tax or a fine, it doesn't really matter, because both of them are punishments. And so you're compelled to, take an action that you normally wouldn't have. And it's especially in the case of healthcare, where health insurance companies are pretty well vilified for being profit-based and not caring for the people that they cover. It's a funny thing that we are now forced to purchase goods and services from them, and to enrich them. It's pretty dark state of things. But now we're debating. It looks like a one-size-fits-all solution for housing. And God knows what the actual ramifications of forcing that level of production of solar panels. We don't know exactly how effective it would be. And solar panels aren't this is kind of a push for greenification of technology and of housing and of obviously reducing the need for power plants, which do pollute. But on the flip side, it might suffer from kind of the same pitfalls of buying an all electric car. Right, in the moment when you're driving the vehicle, it doesn't have any emissions. But when you produce the batteries have a lot of chemicals and harmful shit that goes into them. When you plug your electric car into an outlet at your house or a charging station or whatever, where is it getting power from? It's getting power from a power plant. And that is either coal or, whatever dirty technologies might be being used at this point. Nuclear is probably a good thing for us to develop, but overall, it's not as simple as flipping a switch and environmental repercussions being nullified. It very well just could get pushed to a different area, similar to the green vehicles. But let's get into the question here and talk a little bit about that. So the question goes, as you may know, California recently adopted new standards mandating that most new homes constructed in the state, starting in 2020, must be built with solar panels. The state agency estimates that the mandate will add about $40 to homeowners' average monthly mortgage payment on a 30-year mortgage, while saving consumers $80 a month on energy costs. Would you support or oppose this action in your state? So this is a fairly, I think if you read it and you read it dispassionately, it's this question is, it kind of begs its own answer. Because, I mean, what are most people going to think when you present them a sterile, narrow situation or description where, on average, people save money over time? There'll be an extra cost, but the savings will be greater. And so there's kind of this cognitive tool already built into there that will make people feel silly if they say no. Or even make them feel like, oh, I want people, if I say no, then I want people to pay more for energies costs. Oh no. Somebody's mowing the yard. I don't really care about the planet and trying to reduce emissions or, reduce the amount of energy output that's needed for society. And so it's a question that's very focused on the utilitarian aspect. And it's of, considering like whether something's ethical or not. And it's presenting a very narrow band of information. And like I said before, so it says the state agency estimates, this extra cost in this monthly savings. We don't know how the numbers were crunched. It would be nice to see, other organizations crunch the numbers and see what's worth it or not. So there's a lot of problems in this. It's almost like presenting somebody with a question. Would you rather have a society, with more or less violence? That might not be a perfect analogy, but that's kind of what is being presented right now. It's like, well, do you want things to be the same or be better? Well, people are going to pick the better part of it. And so I think that's where it's useful to at least be familiar with kind of the deontological, I mess that word up all the time, way of looking at morality and ethics and justice, especially from the libertarian point of view. And that is it okay to force people to compel others to act in a way that you want? Even if it's for the greater good, even if it's for something that you think overall would be a good for society. The problem is we all have very limited information about the world, and we all have very limited understandings of how things work. Everything's very complicated. It's massively complicated. And asking the average person, to make a very complicated calculation about like, what would it do for society if we forced all new homes to be constructed with solar panels? Oh, by the way, it'll cost a little bit more, but overall the savings will be higher. Well, it's an insane situation. It's not nearly detailed enough. Like I said before, it's a few sentences long. How can we try to, determine a wide-ranging policy that'll affect all homeowners across the entire nation of, I keep forgetting the number, 350 million Americans? There's no way to calculate what good or bad could come of that. The amount of solar panels that would have to be produced is absolutely massive. So it's pretty silly. Even if you get into the utilitarian argument of it, you have to angle it and you have to present it in a very simplistic and, bent manner to get, the answer that you want. That's kind of what they did here. And that's fundamentally the problem with, I think, with utilitarian arguments like this. is we don't measuring things is very difficult, and and even more difficult is measuring the second order effects or the third order effects of policy is even more difficult, nigh on impossible. And so it appears people just like to ignore them and imagine that you can flip a switch and affect just a small portion of society or the economy that you want without impacting the rest. So overall, it's very silly. I don't like these types of polls, these kinds of answers. And I'm not technical enough. I think my final answer is I'm not technical enough to know if this is a good or bad idea. And nobody is. Absolutely nobody is. And I think the best idea is to allow the market to determine that. Because we have an ideal, right? Sorry about the mowing. We have an ideal of we want society to be more clean and produce less pollutants. Okay, cool. I think most reasonable people will agree with that. But how do we do it? And we really, really need to be able to avoid any overt negative economic realities of policies. And the only way to do that is to allow people to choose their preferences. And if their preference is clean power and, like a sufficient home with solar panels, well, then let people purchase them. Especially if most people believe that it's a good choice, well, let them do it. I mean, why? If it's really true that on average, it would only cost $40 more on a mortgage, but it would save $80, you wouldn't need me. You don't need to force me to do it. You only need to force me to do it if you're not convinced about it, or if you just have the outcome and you don't care if it's true or not, you just want it to happen. Plus, I mean, you got guys like I think this stuff is going to happen eventually anyways. There's no need to force the hand on the market for this, because it just introducing violence into the equation is just going to distort a lot of the economics of it. So what? Elon Musk has developed or helped develop solar panels for houses that he claims are over 20 years or so. I don't know the time frame. Is cost effective, and he can even slap a power brick on the wall to store the energy. And that's another problem with solar panels, is you need to be able to store the energy, right? I mean, solar panels is not a whole energy creation and storage unit. Solar panels are just energy creation, and if you don't have a place to store it, well then energy is wasted. So it has to be put into the rest of the grid to be distributed, or there needs to be a battery in the house to store it. And if you want your house to be more, let's say, self-sufficient, so if like the rest of the power grid goes off and you want to be able to still have power, well, then you need to purchase a battery. And that's pretty expensive, right? I mean, you need some pretty large batteries to power a whole household. And I guess it depends on how much of the house you want powered. But so that's some of the complications that come in here. Like, you can't just say that, oh yeah, no, it's only $40 more with $80 savings. It's quite silly. But Elon Musk is working on it. I'm sure there's other companies that are working on solar panels. Every month I read something where they're increasing the efficiency of solar panels and reducing the cost. So it's just a matter of time. I mean, cell phones are a great thing, right? They're mobile. You can communicate, in pretty much every method that we have. It helps with employment, like everything. And the government didn't have to mandate cell phone purchasing. It happened naturally when the economics lined up, when the technology was ready, when it was cheap enough, and after selling it to rich people for a while to get all the bugs out and to, let the rich early adopters fund the process of refining the technology and making it more accessible. So it's silly to force something like this onto the market. It'll happen when it's ready. Like I said before, and how the poll goes, if most people want it and most people see it as valuable, well, then there's going to be entrepreneurs and companies working to develop and deploy technology like this. There's no need to mandate it, especially when mandates like this. I'm sure there will be like state approved brands, state approved models, and that stuff can be gamed, and there can be regulatory capture where some company approaches the state and says, hey, I'll give you a sweet deal on solar panels, how about you recommend my product, and almost force it in the marketplace, whether it's good or not. So should we mandate solar panels on the rest of the nation? Absolutely not. We don't have enough information, and if everybody wants it, they'll purchase it. There's no need to introduce force and coercion into the situation. Okay, that's gone on long enough. Thanks for listening. Bye.